Sent from Disneyland, history in our hand. So much to say about yesterday and the decades we have spanned. Postcards from the park, this journey will embark. See what has changed and what remains on Sent from Disneyland. Sent from Disneyland.
Welcome to the Sent from Disneyland podcast.
Here age relives fond memories of the past.
If it's your first time joining us, welcome. On this podcast, we'll take a journey into the past and explore Disneyland, Disneyland history, and more, with mementos, snapshots, souvenirs, and postcards sent from Disneyland, from 1955 to the present. Let's start by thanking my patrons from patreon.com. You can join in at any level to support the show and receive snail mail from my trips to Disneyland and from my desk, plus some sneak peeks and bonus content. Special thanks to Random Olive, the first patron to this podcast, and to the rest of the e-ticket patrons, to Nia, Eric Daniels, Monica Seitz Vega, Scott Cagle, Russ Romano, Michael and Christina Cross, and Sheila Harry. C-ticket patrons Serious Inquiries Only, Debbie Weinstein, Jennifer Schneep, Angela Reynolds, Grace Coate, Patty Wolin, and Ben and Noel Bruning. B-ticket patron Joshua Bell, and to the A-ticket patrons Elise Sharp, Zealot Infinity, Alexis Robles, Angel DeBlock, and the Beyond the Railroad podcast. I am your host, your post-host Clocky, and today we have 2 postcards sent from Disneyland. The front of our first postcard has the horse-drawn streetcar headed down Main Street. In the back you can see the Matterhorn, and if you look closely behind some trees, you can see the home of the future. On the back it reads, Horse-drawn streetcar. The leisurely pace of Disneyland's horse-drawn streetcar keynotes the atmosphere of Main Street as guests enjoy a trip around the plaza and glimpse the magnificent Matterhorn. It's postmarked June 22, 1967, with a Garden Grove always use zip code cancel, and a 4-cent black and white Lincoln postage stamp, Scott number 1282. I assume they visited the park on Wednesday, June 21, 1967, when park hours were from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. The weather was a high of 78 and a low of 60. It's addressed to Mr. and Mrs. William Tripp of Owatonna, Minnesota. It reads, Hello Martina and Bill. Herb and I flew down here by jet on Monday and got here in less than 4 hours. Such beautiful sights around here, and all the pretty flowers. We are staying at a motel a mile and a half away. We plan to visit Frank and Lucille one day. Love, Val and Herb. A few weeks ago, while at Disneyland, I thought about the different guest services that have been available at the park, and specifically where guests could make a telephone call. I grabbed a few maps from different years of the park to look to see when telephones have been around Disneyland. The first mention of telephones on a Disneyland map is on the 1956 map, which reads, Public telephones located in each land of Disneyland's 5 lands, Main Street, Tomorrowland, Fantasyland, Frontierland, and Adventureland. Look for the telephone booths marked in these areas. Although they are referenced, there's no indication on where the telephones were on the map. Other early maps suggest checking in with Disneyland employees or Disneylanders for the closest telephone location. The first time the phones were displayed on the map was in 1966. The Disneyland map had individual maps for each land, and a detailed guide of where attractions, services, food, refreshments, free shows and exhibits, and the shops and stores were located, as well as amenities like telephones, restrooms, and ticket booths. Telephones were displayed on the map using a symbol of 4 black squares. On Main Street, phones were located near the original lockers in between the Emporium and the Firehouse, and halfway down Main Street, where the lockers currently are today. Adventureland and Frontierland shared phones, and were located on the Frontierland side, inside one of the log fort towers. New Orleans Square had phones next to the entrance of Pirates of the Caribbean and near the restrooms. Fantasyland had phones near the restrooms behind the souvenir stand and the Fantasyland Theater, where the Pinocchio bathrooms are today. Tomorrowland was the land with the most phones, which included phones near the Fun Photo Shop, near where the Star Trader is today, behind the Tomorrowland Art Corner, near where Galactic Grill is today, and finally, phones near where the Circle Vision Theater were, where Buzz Lightyear's Astro Blasters is today. This final location was fitting, as the Circle Vision presentation of America the Beautiful was presented by Bell Telephone. As time went on, more phones were added, and some were taken away. Looking at the fall-winter 1972-73 Disneyland map, the phones next to Pirates of the Caribbean were removed. Phones were added as Bear Country was added next to the restrooms where Tiana's Bayou Adventure is today. Phones were removed in Tomorrowland. from near the Circle Vision Theater to the opposite side of the building, where the exit of Pixie Hollow is today. And phones were added in Tomorrowland next to the exit and entrance of the Skyway and the Tomorrowland Railroad Station. Also in the 1972-1973 map, the icon used to show where telephones were located was changed from the 4 black squares to a symbol of a rotary telephone. Payphones were also added to outside of the park, near the lockers just to the left of the Disneyland main entrance. Add some flair to your mail by checking out stamps at Enfield Post. You can explore different stamp options on our Etsy site, grab some great deals by following EP Sunday Sales on Instagram, or create something special and have her design a stamp array for your invitation or celebration. You can head over to EnfieldPost.com and explore all the different vintage postage stamps you can use on your next card or letter. That's ENFIELDPOST on Instagram and EnfieldPost.com for your wedding and vintage postage needs. Enfield Post is the official postage stamp sponsor of the Sent from Disneyland podcast. The front of our next postcard has the African section of It's a Small World. You can see the large pink elephant in the center, hyenas laughing on the left, a pink rhino playing the drums on the right, plus a lion sitting under a child playing the flute. On the back it reads, Africa, It's a Small World. Legendary adventure awaits in deepest Africa for Disneyland voyagers on the happiest cruise that ever sailed. It's postmarked June 11, 1970, with a Buena Park cancel and a 6-cent Franklin D. Roosevelt postage stamp, Scott number 1284. I assume they visited the park on Wednesday, June 10, 1970, when park hours were from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. The weather was a high of 73 and a low of 61. It's addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Kenneth Hill of Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. It reads, Dear Mid and Ken, this is great. This park is so fantastic, you can't even describe it to someone. You'd have to see it yourself. We're going to Knott's Berry Farm tomorrow and driving up the Pacific Coast Friday. We'll be in San Francisco Monday. Last Monday went to Reno, Lake Tahoe, and Carson City, Nevada. Tell you all about it later. Love, me. Looking at a 1980s map, payphones were added to Main Street next to Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. And on the south side of America Sings, the phone icon was also changed to a simple handheld receiver. There were also phones added to outside of the park, next to the kennel and the stroller and wheelchair distribution center. Although the phones next to Mr. Lincoln had been removed as early as 1982, the only other change to phones in the 80s were the phones located in Bear Country, as they were displaced as Splash Mountain was added and Bear Country became Critter Country. The phones migrated over to the restroom at the Hungry Bear restaurant. 1990 saw the removal of the phones near the Emporium on Main Street, USA, but by 1993 phones were added with Toontown, located near the center of that land. Also in the 90s, phones were added to the end of Main Street near the Baby Care Center and First Aid. Some phone locations slowly started disappearing in 2014, and by the end of 2014, all the payphones were removed from Disneyland Park. My incoming postcard is sponsored by the Art Throwdown. Art Throwdown, or ATD, is a craft hour on Instagram, starting at 9 p.m. Eastern or 6 Pacific. Art Throwdown is a wonderful community of artists who love to share their craft, from creating sticker postcards and coloring techniques to intricate paper cutting and unique crafting. It's always a treat to watch a show and occasionally get some one-of-a-kind postcards from the group. Each host brings something a little different to each show. I'll list some of the regular hosts, or you can follow Russ Romano 2021 on Instagram. The front of my incoming postcard has mountains, foothills, and apple trees, with a red apple truck at the bottom center. On the top it reads, Oak Glen, California. It's postmarked September 20th, 2024, with a Riverside cancel and a USPS paid postage retail printed postage stamp. It reads, 9/20/2024. Hi Clocky, I took a day trip to the apple orchards of Oak Glen yesterday. It was a great day out in nature and the fresh air. We are coming into peak apple season now as fall begins, so there was a lot to see. I came home with all kinds of good stuff. Sending smiles, Angela. Thank you so much for the postcard, Angela, and thanks for going on a wild phone chase with me as we looked where all the payphones were at the park. Angela and I spent an evening at Trader Sam's looking at a map and then going to where all the phones were throughout the years in each land. As we were looking through all the locations, some of the locations are now used for AED devices, ATMs, or have been completely covered with fresh or new theming. The one standout were the phones that were located near the exit of Pixie Hollow, where you can still see a handful of squares where the telephone stands used to be. This postcard is also fun because it's a wood postcard made by Lantern Press. It's made with sustainable birch. It's always fun to get different types of postcards in the mail. I have a handful of wood postcards and even a few copper postcards in my collection. Thanks for listening to Sent from Disneyland. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and tell your friends. It would also help to leave a 5-star rating and comment on whatever podcast platform you use. If you'd like to support the show financially, please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/sentfromdisneyland. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Sent from Disneyland or my website, sentfromdisneyland.com. For questions and comments, send me a postcard addressed to Sent from Disneyland, P.O. Box 44, Hood, California, 95639. This podcast is not affiliated with Disney, the United States Postal Service, or any post office or Disney-related properties. Opinions expressed on this podcast belong to the host and guests of the Sent from Disneyland podcast. This podcast is produced and edited by Clocky McDowell, website designed by Misty McDowell, theme song was written and performed by Noah Sunday Lefkowitz. Take it away, Noah.